Guys, welcome to another edition of Before the Whistle presented by BRK Insurance Group. If your business is looking for the best in employee benefits, commercial property and casualty insurance, or retirement and 401k plan services, there's no one better suited to meet your challenges and build a plan centered around your needs than BRK Insurance Group. What's going on, y'all? Happy Friday. Happy eve of Tulane's spring game of the 2024 season. I'm your host, Maddy and I'm excited to welcome my guest back to today's show, Sam Lockwood of Wave After Wave on Twitter, who is someone that I ended up graduating with. He found his way into covering this team these last couple of seasons just out of a genuine interest. It was really fun connecting with him a few episodes back, just as someone that, I felt like kind of in the lost football generation of Tulane football, as, class of 2016, 30 years old at this point. He was one of those kind of rare diehard fans during that time, but it was really exciting kind of looking forward into the spring practice. And so kind of looking at how this has played out, just how much interest there's been, the fact that, despite not really being able to see any of these practices, the amount of information that's come out, the amount of interest that's really been drummed up. And that's kind of just what happens when you have a new coaching staff come in and a quarterback competition, which draws a lot of eyes. And I think it's one that I've covered in the past. It's kind of a thankless job for everyone involved because everyone just wants the answer at the most important role on the field. So the expectations there, I think, are a little higher than other positions, what have you. But I think this coaching staff's approach to all of these position groups, all of these competitions is really just shown that their play on the field and what they do, in between reps, that's going to speak for it more than their recruiting ranking, where they ended up transferring from. We've really just seen competition win out throughout spring, but also kind of tempering expectations. I had read, again, one of his interviews that he had done with Sean King this offseason about the fact that none of these guys have earned the legacy of the last couple of seasons, that most of those guys, if not, essentially all of the main characters in that turnaround are no longer on this team. And so it really is, nothing has been earned by any of these guys. And you're seeing that play out at the quarterback competition. But it's really nice to just kind of get someone else going in the conversation, talk about what we've seen develop throughout spring, what that shows about this coaching staff, and what it shows about the quarterback room and what a true competition really is. So the last time I had you on here, I don't think spring practice for Tulane had started up to that point, but what really has stuck out to me more than anything is just the amount of offseason interest in Tulane football. I just feel like all of the spring practices, there is really just a lot of people that really want to be involved in this program.
Yeah, I mean, the energy is clearly there, right? Like, I've only been in the writing game for one season or a season and a half, however you want to classify it. So I imagine you track your metrics a little bit better than I do. But I've been shocked at how interested people have been from, like, an off-season standpoint. I'm like, I'll write a few articles, a couple people diehards will read, and that'll be that. It's been people on Twitter, people on the blog have been really interested in what's happening at practice, who's winning this competition, where are we with this? I think the fan buy-in's at an all-time high, and I think you're seeing that on the field. People attending spring practice, speak for myself and say that I've never done that, but I don't think many people ever did before this year. So I think that's an exciting development.
Yeah, and there's been people at the spring game in years past, but I mean, people have been asking for weeks now when the spring game is coming. And what I also really appreciate about the way that they've set it up this year is having it on the same day as Crawfest and having all of these giveaways. Feels like it's finally kind of that move on Tulane's side of things to incentivize something like this in the offseason where you really can see the university side of things, and it just makes it easier to get people out there.
Yeah, I think they're incentivizing the students, giving them a reason. It's like, hey, come eat in the quad, have a couple beers, and then come over and watch some football. I mean, that's what, Louisiana's all about, right? Have a party in the quad, and then, once you tailgated, enjoyed your crawfish and a couple of beers, head over to the game, check it out. You're probably pretty packed stands. It was exciting for the kids and, exciting for the team. I think I'm personally very upset it's not coming on ESPN Plus because I'm out of town. That's the only time I've ever said that, right? Like how badly I want to stream the spring game. And I'm about as diehard as it gets, right? So like, this is the first year that I've wanted to really watch it and I can't. And I understand people's perspective. That's like, oh, they don't want to give away any like trade secrets, but we're early in offense install. And I don't think we're too worried about that, but it is what it is.
Yeah, it's definitely early. But I just has really felt different this offseason, really with the amount of attention paid during spring practice. But it sticks out that really this is my first season, at least from my perspective, covering the team where there is just such a big hole at quarterback. And I feel like spring, you don't really think that much about things that aren't really going well, not really realizing just how much of a sure thing, as much as people talked about Tajay Spears and how much he really did for this offense. I think really what you're seeing in this spring practice is just the effect of Michael Pratt and the related absence of him.
Totally. I think we got used to having good quarterback play, which very few in college and the pros can say. It's like rarely do you have a guy who starts for 4 straight years who's not going to turn the ball over, who's not going to make any dumb decisions, and comes into camp as the unquestioned leader. He can lead knowing no one's coming for his spot. These other guys, they've never been that leader. You know, Ty Thompson, a lot of accolades in high school and at Oregon, but he never started. There was always a guy on top of him. And so it's different. And, you know, like any other job, it's like it's nice to be a support role. When you become the guy, you have to step up and produce. And it's hard to do that when you've never done it before. So I think the quarterback competition, at first, I thought it was a little bit of smoke and Coach Craddock with the classic coach speak when we first talked. But now it's like, are these guys ready to step into those massive shoes that Mike left? And I don't know that they are.
Yeah, I think really what I've learned is I try to think, because I've at least covered an NFL quarterback competition, and really I didn't start until training camp. I know they have OTAs, but it's really just kind of limited. So I'll be really curious to kind of see how things come around. But for me, at least, it's really just stuck out when you think about just how much time Michael Pratt had under center in a practice setting. And yeah, these guys would go with the twos here and there, but do you think that it's just kind of the effect of almost the pressure of filling someone's shoes like Michael Pratt when none of these guys have really been that guy before?
I think there's a lot of pressure. I just think there's more eyeballs, like you and I were talking about. I think more people care. Tulane's had not one fluke season where it was like, oh my God, it was amazing, they won the Cotton Bowl and nothing. It's now 2 seasons. That's sustained success by most measures. So now this 3rd season college football playoff coming up, people are looking at Tulane, and it's not just you and I and not just graduates. A lot of people are curious about what's going on with this football program. That's a lot more pressure. Ty comes in, you know, with the name brand, and Kai comes in with his first big chance to start. And I think that's weighing on both them. And then not to mention, we got a 3rd guy in the conversation that I know we're going to get to later. I think it's a lot of pressure on them, and it's the spring. Like we said, I remember when Ty's foot injury came out, my friends were like, oh my God, is he going to be okay? And I was like, the season is in like 6 months. Like, we're just really early on interest. So I think that's a big factor there, that we're not quite there yet, but people are so interested that it feels like we're 2 weeks from football.
Yeah, I do kind of wonder if, you know, not so much rush the process, but how much you're really going to glean from these spring practices, especially when you consider that Ty was limited coming into them. And I know it's just kind of life in that way, but at least having spring break in the middle of spring practice kind of made it really hard, I think, to just build that momentum with these guys. But I also do kind of think for at least Ty probably gave him a little more time to heal. But quarterback competition, it's just been interesting in terms of what you're kind of expecting out of these guys, because like you said before, none of these guys have had to be the guy before. But how do you really think that these guys can draw that out in a practice setting in a way that perhaps we're not seeing yet?
Well, I think obviously practices and games are different, and full speed situations. And as we get closer, things are going to change. Like spring game, they're still learning the offense. That's a factor. Ty came from elsewhere. Darian is just kind of starting. He's a young guy. He's a redshirt freshman. And then Kai is working with a new offensive coordinator. So it's really new to him too, even though he was at Tulane. You know, Joe Craddock's offense probably not going to look like Slade Nagel's offense based on kind of the film I've watched and talking to the 2 respective coaches. So I think they're all learning. So that's one part of it, and finding the right reads. And it's when it's second nature is when they can really shine, right? They can use their arm strength. They can use their decision-making when they know what to do. So I think, you know, people have to pump the brakes a little bit, but the fact that we are having a legitimate conversation about a quarterback competition means a lot to me, because I didn't think we were going to be here when Ty committed.
Yeah, it's fair. I think a lot of people just kind of presumed based on accolades and what have you that he was kind of going to be that presumed guy. But at the end of the day, you know, Kai's the one with the most experience, but really to me, 4 games is just so negligible in the grand scheme of things, especially when it's over the course of 3 seasons. I mean, he's played a hell of a competition every single year that he's stepped in. It's been in these really big critical moments. So, you know, he can do that in that setting, but none of these guys have really had to fill that void before. And I think about Kai Horton. When you're around someone like Michael Pratt, you want some of that to rub off on you, but you also never really have those traits come out of you. So I feel like at least the benefit of a quarterback competition is really, it's just felt like nothing has been given to these guys. It doesn't really matter what their recruiting ranking is or what their, prestige or clout or whatever going into this year. I think at least the quarterback competition really sets the tone that none of these positions are really given to these guys. And I think back to your Sean King interview, and the idea that these guys really have to earn it. And to me, that's really what I see through this.
I think that's one of the things that this coaching staff is clearly big on is it starts with the quarterback, right? It's like if we're not giving it to the high profile 5-star, 4-star, whatever you want to call him, guy from Oregon, he doesn't come in with a job, then nobody comes in with a job, right? It sets the standard that if the big shot guy who everyone knows his name doesn't come in with any gravitas, any clout, then all of you are fighting for your jobs. I think that's important to John. I think it's important to Craddock, I think Gasparotto, you name it. I think they really want to instill a culture that you earn every snap you get on this field. And if they don't do it with quarterback, then they can't say it for everybody else. They want to treat the biggest position with the same level of care and intensity that they would with receiver, with corner, with safety. And I think that's what it is. It starts at the top. Everybody earns their spot, including Ty Thompson, including Mekhi Hughes, including Shaz Preston, Mario Williams, and like some are performing better than others in early days. But I think it's important to this coaching staff, from what I can tell, that every guy earns their reps. And then that's not just lip service. That's real.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's guys that have stacked days, as they put it. And so someone like Mario Williams, you can comfortably say has shot up to the top because he's just been so consistent throughout. And I mean, at the end of the day, if you're having a quarterback competition, it means that no one's perfect in that race. And so the idea that they're going to have good days and bad days is just kind of to be expected a little bit to me. But I think the spring game gives just that opportunity. We, at least under Willie Fritz, the way that the spring game's gone the last couple of years, I personally just don't love when the team gets split up into two. I know that it could be valuable in terms of this competition, but when I would see Michael Pratt taking a snap from the backup center and things just kind of went awry from there, it's hard for me to think that that would give more value than these guys just really going up against the ones and the twos. But the fact that the defense can score, we've seen these quarterbacks make some mistakes throughout the spring game, but having these turnovers actually turn into points for the defense, I think could be a really good way to kind of push these guys in this competition.
It's interesting for sure. When I read about it, I was also a little disappointed. I want to see best on best. I want to see ones versus ones. I want to know what the starting defense looks like versus the starting offense. But in this case, that's not the way Coach Sumrall wants to do it. He knows a little bit more about coaching football than I do, so I'm going to go ahead and trust him on his methods. And I'm going to watch, or take or receive notes from afar, I should say, because I can't watch, unfortunately. But I'm interested to see what, is drawn out of that, what we glean from the defense and the offense in a, not exactly glorified scrimmage setting, like less so than a, true spring game. Will it be better or worse? I don't know. I've never really, watched a practice, so to speak. So I can't really, speak to it, but I do know we're going to get to see these guys in full speed action, which we've seen the last 2 weeks. And they know this is like a level up, right? These guys understand that this is slightly more important than the last 2 scrimmages. So I think they're going to bring their best. And the quarterbacks know that the eyes are on them. I think the most people will pay attention to this, what news comes out of it, and which quarterback threw the best. So I think Ty, Kai, and Darian are the guys I want to focus on.
Yeah, 100%. And I just totally blanked on in terms of the competition coming out in this spring game and really the benefit of having this, at least in this year. When I think back to last year, I think, you did see how Kai could run an offense in the spring game. You saw some running backs get to emerge with having those 2 separate teams, but we knew largely what the starters were at so many positions. So it was easy to just kind of split them up and see them go. But looking at, how we're evaluating the competition out there after the first scrimmage, I was really impressed by the wide receivers, but I also knew that the defensive back room is super young. And so evaluating that in terms of was that better or worse. And so at least being able to stack on that in the second scrimmage, I think the quarterbacks did flutter a little bit, but I also did see the cornerback play improve a little bit. So going into the spring game, I feel like at least from what this team needs now is some actual answers at some roles. Because I do have a feeling that they're still going to be active in the transfer portal, which is weird to discuss in the middle of all this. But John Sumrall has been pretty upfront. His whole coaching staff's been pretty upfront about a lot of the stuff that they've said. And so do you think that they're going to focus on those holes after the spring game as well through the portal?
This is uncharted territory, right? I mean, I've been following the portal on Twitter as closely as anybody, and it's wild to see that we're still looking. I mean, the 2 things that are really clear to me from that are edge and cornerback. And John Sumrall has been clear about edge rusher, corner less so. And the one thing I think that I've noticed is that we haven't really been going after a left tackle as hard as I thought we might. And whether that's because Trey Tuggle is having a great camp or there just aren't that many out there, I don't know. But that's one thing that I just as a fan and a viewer have noticed, that it's corners and edges are constantly being linked to us, multiple corners, multiple edges. So I think he's definitely going to try and still shore up those positions. I think each practice tells him more about where we have needs. I don't think another quarterback's coming in. I think it's those three, and one of them's going to win the job, just to put that to bed while people are, connecting imaginary dots. But I think that's one thing to take away, that maybe the offensive line is pretty set at this point. It's Tuggle, it's Shadre Hurst, it's Vinny Murphy, it's Rashad Green when he comes back from injury, and it's Josh Remtich. I think that's your starting five, based on what I'm seeing with the lack of tackles being connected to us, but maybe not. But yeah, I think the transfer portal is still very much a possibility. We might see new corners and new edge starters coming from that portal, and I'm excited to see who those might be.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you that there's no way that they're bringing in a quarterback. I mean, we would be having a completely different conversation about the last couple of weeks if that was the case. And, I don't think that's really the message that they want to be sending to this group of guys at this point. But even though I don't think that they're going to add to this room, I think, like you said, a lot of people thought that this would be almost wrapped up by the end of spring. But, how much is it a 3-quarterback race in terms of this immediate next season? I'm not entirely sure, but you also have to think just about the vision of the program and looking forward after the fact. And to me, the fact that that Darian Mensah was able to be retained here and he's even in the conversation at all just says a lot about where that guy is.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting, right? Because obviously every coach is going to say, all right, the guy who was here versus the guy who came from away, those two are in competition, right? That's only fair. Kai started before. He's played some. People are familiar with him. He deserves a shot. Darian Mensah being included doesn't feel like coach speak. It doesn't feel like they would just throw him in there for sake of doing so. It feels like he's earned it. And then you think about, I heard some, very positive things on him last year, but he was, down the depth chart, and obviously he's never going to start over Mike. But the fact that he stayed when I know he was one of Willie's guys and Fritz was really high on him. I don't know Houston's roster that well. I can't imagine they have a quarterback that's that great, given the rebuild going on over there. I'm kind of surprised that he did stick around. I think that must have been conversations with Craddock, conversations with Sumrall, thinking, hey, maybe not this year, but down the road, he has a place to start here. Because otherwise, I can't imagine why he would have stuck around. And also his inclusion in the Welcome to Uptown episode, and also just generally in the media, he's being talked about. That speaks a lot more volumes to me than we're having a quarterback competition. It's kind of like, all right, not only are we having a competition, but there really are 3 guys involved.
Yeah, and I think to your point, too, about keeping him on this long term and really just showing a lot about what they might see kind of at the future of this role. I know that the transfer portal era helps teams out a lot. And Michael Pratt was kind of that rare guy that stuck around and built a program, but it's hard to get developed as a quarterback to me in the NFL at all these days. And it's even more difficult at the college level. But when you start to transfer around a bunch of places, to me, you really lose out on the ability to actually grow and develop as a player and have that kind of long-term vision past this season, where I know everyone's looking to the college football playoffs and what this team can do this year, but you also have to kind of think about that room as a whole looking forward. And also things can happen. I mean, yeah, Michael Pratt was a little reckless at times out there, but things can just happen in football. And I think just the fact that they see him as ready to go, at least as the other guys, should he be able to step in. I've heard people say if you have, 3 starting quarterbacks and you have not one starting quarterback, and you might not have an elite one, but I think that we've seen the depth of Tulane's quarterback room pay off in dividends all throughout the last couple of years. And I think Darian Mensah is an important inclusion in that now.
Depth is important at any position. Obviously, you want a 1A, you want a starter, you want a guy who is head and shoulders above the rest. But I was very excited when Kai came back. I know, other people were like, we need to get somebody from the portal. We need somebody. Kai Horton, whether he's the starting quarterback or the backup or the third string, wherever he falls in, will contribute to this team a ton. I think he could be any of those 3. I'm not sure. But I know that when he was retained, I was excited because he stood in. He was great in the Ole Miss game, the Southern Miss game, keeping us intact until Mike came back, keeping a AAC championship season, alive. That is a very, very important distinction. A guy who, when we lost our star quarterback and easily the season could have gone on that, keeps us in the Ole Miss game. And I think that helped everyone believe in themselves. Like, even without Mike, who was one of the best quarterbacks ever to come through Tulane, we still are playing toe-to-toe with a team that won a New Year's Six Bowl last year, and many thought was kind of a snub from the college football playoff, if it were broader. And Kai Horton went toe-to-toe with them. He can play. I don't think, Sumrall's lying about that. I think any fan of this team knows that. So I love that we have depth, and I love that we have quarterbacks that can go out and win games. Is there more upside with Ty? Probably, but it's not necessarily about upside if you can't run the offense and move the chains. And that's something that I know Kai Horton can do. Something I think Darian Mensah might be able to do well as well. So I think that's why it's good we're having this competition.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And even though I said that it's a negligible amount of starting experience for Kai, it is a completely different conversation if he came in against UMass and Alcorn State and that kind of conversation. But he came in very unexpectedly against Houston and performed the way that he did. And like you said, I think his just the way that they hung in that game against Ole Miss, it was, as much as I don't hate the term quality loss, it just did so much for the team's confidence that year. But you also consider that he was third on the depth chart going into that game, and it just shows how quickly things can happen. And so if they weren't confident in Darian Mensah, probably have another guy in that room at this point. You've seen just the way that they build that room out. But I also think we've seen really what a good quarterback can do, but also sometimes you might become a little over-reliant on that to me. And what I think has shown more than anything else is all of these guys have their pros and cons, but it really is about the system this year more than anything else. And the amount of playmakers that they have, I think really any of these guys can get it done. You just want to see those intangibles come out.
Yeah, you're from the Bay Area, right, Maddie?
Yeah.
So San Francisco 49ers are a perfect example of weapons over quarterback, right? I think if you have guys, and obviously we don't have Christian McCaffrey or Deebo Samuel uptown, but if you have talent like that, which we do, we have some really talented players, don't get me wrong. Those are just two of the best guys to ever touch footballs. Anyways, you have the ability to have an offense that's relatively quarterback proof, I think. And with a good offensive coordinator like Craddock, you have the ability to work to your strengths, which is running the ball, getting the ball out in space quickly, getting it to your playmakers. And when you have guys like Mario, like Shaz, like Keith Brown, who can, hit on slants, can hit on quick screens, running backs who can, wear down the linebacking core on the defensive line to open it up for the quarterback to have more time. It's going to make it really easy on whoever wins this job. So I think this offense is in a better place than it's been in a long time. It's just quarterback is so important that, Mike Pratt might have made such a difference that it looked better before. But now, as a whole, the offense is definitely in a better place than it was last year.
Yeah, 100%. And they also benefit, again, from the element of a lot of surprise going into this year. I just think back to last season and trying to do game prep for half these teams that I really never paid any attention to that were all suddenly in the conference with Tulane, and really them all having that edge because of that, where, yeah, you could look at Troy's offense, you can look at a bunch of those things, but it's just so different, especially when you don't have quarterbacks decided, that by the time we get to fall camp, teams are already trying to make their opponent game plans now. And yeah, all these guys can kind of execute in the same way, but they do have a little bit of that element going into the year. That being said, these quarterbacks do have to show that they're able to go when the going gets tough, because that opening slate with Oklahoma and Kansas State, you don't really have that much time to play around with it. And that's where I think I see the benefit of a quarterback competition for these guys. I think if you just handed it to Kai because he was the guy that came back, or you handed it to Ty because he was the one with the accolades, then you probably wouldn't see them really have to dig deep and see what they're really made of at that role.
It's about the intangibles, right? I totally agree with you. It's about leadership at this point for me. Craddock had a good point on Welcome to Uptown. He's like, I want the guy who's leading us in the battle, who when things get tough, he's going to dig down deep and lead his men and, hopefully win a football game, because that's what we need really here. I think the talent level is there. Is it negligible between the three? Kai probably has the strongest arm of the three. Darian might have the quickest release. Kai might have the most savvy, pay a compliment to each of them. All three have talent. Who is the guy that's going to be the one that incites the best out of his teammates? And that's where I think it's interesting. I mean, who is the guy that has the best rapport, gets the most excitement and energy out of his teammates? And John Sumrall always is a player-led team. It's got to be a player-led team.
Yeah, I don't know how much intangibles you can necessarily gain from the spring game at this point. So I do think in terms of people really wanting to see that out of them, you might not be able to see that until fall camp at least. And I think it would, again, just kind of be easy to hand the job off to one of those top guys. And I think the idea is you want it to be one of the guys that you either brought in or convinced to stay here. But you also have to kind of think of the long-term development of that quarterback role, because having a good system, it works. But we've also seen, the 49ers are a good argument, but we've yet to see them win the Super Bowl with that argument. For me, they're also a very good example in the merit of actually looking at every quarterback on your roster and not being afraid to go with the really unpopular, cloutless option, if you will, in Brock Purdy over a first-round draft pick. And I think that, the sunken cost fallacy is something that gets just a lot of teams. But
Sure.
I think what you're really wanting at this point is someone that can just kind of step in, execute the system, and it's an exciting system to look at. But that's where I really see, Darian Mensah being the value here is you can really kind of look at him as developing him for that long-term role. And then you're able to build an offense around a quarterback where ultimately it's going to be a huge credit to Coach Craddock, because he probably would like to be able to design an offense with a little more specificity sooner rather than later. So I just think the fact that we've been able to talk about this much offensive firepower says a lot.
Yeah, and it's a good point that you made, first and foremost, with the sunken cost fallacy. We all do it. Nobody wants to admit it, but if you spend more money on something, in this case, the star ratings are higher or whatever it is, you think it's better, you think you need to use it, even though the other thing you have might work better, in any situation in life. And that's tough with football, because it's like, all right, before the season, they went out and got a guy who many thought was one of the best QBs on the market, and he still might be. I don't want to discount Ty here from this competition. He's still very much in it. But being able to holistically appreciate what you have is something I think I credit this coaching staff with. They're not scared to go with a guy, and that's one of the things that Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers get a lot of credit in my book for, is saying, like, all right, we're going with the best guy. And the best guy might be Ty, the best guy might be Kai, or the best guy might be Darian. But they're going to go with that guy. I truly believe that they will run a full three-man competition based on just what they're saying. I mean, it's what John's saying. It's what Coach Craddock is saying. It's just like, I see no reason for them to keep harping on it if it wasn't true. Like, they could do hey, we were at 3, now we're kind of narrowing it down to 2. But they haven't done that. So I think you're right that it's tough to kind of, glean so much on intangibles. But you got to keep watching the team and seeing what the coaches say and try and pick up on the language. And that's what I'm trying to do with, the Darian Mensah beat, so to speak, is just notice they keep talking about him. Notice that he got a little bit of juice on the Welcome to Uptown episode. The team seems to react. The quick clip of him, bringing the team for a breakdown of a huddle. You can notice the energy there. It's louder than the other guys. That's one snippet that does not win a quarterback competition, but it's just something I'm taking into account.
Yeah, no, 100%. Again, I think that this coaching staff's been very forthcoming with just a lot of their conversations, and really just kind of setting the tone for this high standard. And I think the competition really speaks to that. I just personally think if you don't consider everyone, it makes no sense to have a real competition in the first place. It's what you saw happen with Mekhi Hughes. But I also think it just really goes to show that you really have to work to earn your spot on this roster. And you have a new coaching staff coming in. You have really no core of this team from the last couple of years still here. And something that sticks out at practice I picked up on the last couple of days, for example, is Rishi Ratan, one of the cornerbacks on the team, who I believe is a walk-on. He's consistently been making interceptions plays during practice, and he's been running with the ones in place of Jai Eugene for the last week and a half or so. And you heard John Sumrall talk about that after practice, and really just his play on the field has demanded the role. So they just kind of shown to me that they're not really willing to go with the unpopular choice or what have you, but that they're really truly evaluating these guys and also paying attention to the ones that are stacking the days and putting up those good performances no matter where they are on the perceived depth chart.
Yeah, and it's also proof that we as fans don't know as much as we think we do. You know what I mean, right? Like, Coach Sumrall, the rest of the coaching staff is evaluating every day in practice, and there is no depth chart. As much as I want to put one out or you want to put one out, they are watching every day, and it's clear the corner's up for grabs. I mean, think about how many guys left. I mean, Jarius Monroe, Lance Robinson, AJ Hampton, amongst others. You know what I mean? DJ Dallas, or what is his name? That's not quite right.
DJ Douglas, yeah.
DJ Douglas, DJ Dallas, Seahawks. DJ Douglas, thank you. That many guys have exited the team. Cornerback's wide open, and so guys like that, walk-ons, first-year guys have a chance if they're making plays. And I think that's a quarterback competition that I really want to watch, knowing, Lou Tillery, Jai Eugene, maybe Micah Robinson when he gets here, the names we're all maybe more familiar with. Obviously, a freshman from Alabama, Jay Money, whose name is also escaped me. Like, there's a lot of guys that we know the names of, but we don't know who the starters are going to be. And that's something that I'm excited to watch, and why I think we're looking to corner in the transfer portal, because that position's wide open.
Yeah, and it is just really one that you benefit from having that experience there and that film time. I was talking to the guys that were there last year and how much time they've played real meaningful snaps of football and still ask guys to eye check them on the sidelines. It's just such a complicated position, but I appreciate how upfront and candid they are with that. I think we might see some moves in the transfer portal, but I think, largely the core of this team is here and can only really fill this many holes to me moving in. I think that those skill positions are a little easier to slot in, but I think for the large part, we've seen this team, we've seen, at least the inklings of what this identity under Coach Sumrall and this new coaching staff has been. And, what's been kind of your takeaway of what you've learned the most about this coaching staff and this team throughout spring?
I think my takeaway, first of all, my buddy just said false alarm. My takeaway is that, we have the team, for the most part, like you said, that we're expecting to have. Right? Like, it's not like, and skill positions can come in corner and receiver. It's a little bit like you come in, you don't need a playbook, you know what you're doing. But the rest of the guys, for the most part, the key positions, like the quarterback, so to speak, of the offense and defense, linebacker, defensive line, and the offensive line are all there. Like, those guys are going to be the ones that are going to lead this team. So we're going to look to who's going to step up and who's going to raise their level of play. Because I think Sumrall's been clear in that sometimes it's not good enough for him. And he'll tell you, like, this practice wasn't good enough for me. He expects high energy, expects a high level. And I think it's hard in, April to be hitting at full velocity when football seems so far away. Finding the guys that are digging deep, that are practicing like this is the biggest game of their life, because that's what's going to win you the job. It's clear to me that it's all about what's done on the field and who can, summon from themselves in April what they're going to need in September.
It's easy to hear a promo in the middle of a podcast and think, of course they like the product, they're paid too. Well, if you know me at all, then you know two things. One, I'm truthful, almost to a fault. And two, if I were in it for the money, I'd certainly be doing something else. So believe me when I say that I love Blue Oak Barbecue. The food, the drinks, the people, the location, yes, all of that. Blue Oak Barbecue has a great selection of your favorites from the smoker, fantastic sides, and awesome bar specials each and every week. And we have something really exciting in the works coming out, I believe, next month. There at Blue Oak from the drink category. But in the meantime, go check them out. Blue Oak Barbecue, located at 900 North Carrollton Avenue here in New Orleans, or visit them online at blueoakbarbecue.com. And back again to these April specials. Monday, you stick to your classic with your red beans and rice. You got a chicken mole on Tuesdays. That looks really delicious just based on that picture. And then you keep it simple on Wednesday with the house smoked turkey sandwich with guacamole, arugula, and killer wheat bread. And that is definitely something that I am looking forward to trying over at Blue Oak for sure. So go get yourself some specials. Again, that was Sam Lockwood, who is the writer of Wave After Greenwave.com on Twitter and a class of 2016 Tulane graduate with me. It's just been really exciting to have this interest in Tulane spring football. I remember when I was screaming from the mountaintops about how they were performing after the 2-10 season, and kind of felt like we were speaking into the void. But I really, if nothing else, being able to be the sideline reporter and be at every single spring practice shows me how much a team is really built in the spring. And you might not get necessarily all of the answers at all of the position groups, but that's where the identity starts to form. That's where the chemistry with these new guys really starts to come together. And you're going to see that all culminate in the spring game this weekend, which I'm extremely excited about. Again, I think Tulane's done a really great job of having it be on the same day as Crawfest, having all of these giveaways for fans and students that end up coming to the game. And I do think that there genuinely is interest there. And you're going to see, the ones go up against the ones. You're going to see some true battles out there. And I think, again, having the defense have the opportunity to score, it just breeds the sense of competition throughout really all of the groups. But as we talked about, there still definitely are positions of need. And we might see some guys at this spring game. You've seen just the amount of recruits that have been around campus. It's really been exciting how relevant Tulane football has been, and it's really only just spring. These guys are going to have this entire offseason to work on their craft, and really, to me, that's an opportunity for them. People that caught my episode on Wednesday, it was coming off of a pretty underwhelming and disappointing practice, particularly the physicality in the red zone, and then the lack of leadership of guys on both sides of the ball failing to step up and kind of corral that in. And you saw them really bounce back today on both units, and seeing that competition going, seeing them get a little chirpy again. But you saw the guys at every single position group, to me, be so much better than they were on Tuesday. And that's really what you're asking for out of these guys at this point, with John Sumrall pointing out after practice that Tyler Grubbs came into the defensive meeting rooms afterwards and was sitting with the coaching staff. He was upset about it and, really came in with that mindset. I mean, that's really the leadership that you're looking for. you want it out of quarterback, but you also want the guy that is the best man for the job. And it's a very well-rounded role. And sometimes you have to just be thrust into the setting, and then those other traits come with it. Some guys are more natural leaders than others. Some guys, it might show up a little sooner than others. It's not something that's really built for everyone, but it is a necessary component of being quarterback. So come fall, you want to see a little more of that command, but you really just want to see what this offense looks like, what this team looks like with, again, your ones versus your ones. You're built off of these 3 scrimmages at this point. We've seen guys be placed into positions to be, starters or have a chance at making the roster purely based on what they've done on the field throughout these last couple practices. And I think that real even slate has just been such a pleasure to watch and cover. And I'm really looking forward to breaking down the spring game after this weekend.